Hello, dear friends and colleagues. Welcome. My name is Pam Spar, and I have the pleasure of being the facilitator for our time today. And on behalf of the intersectional feminist, popular education and activism, archives and hubs, is that a long name? Uh, at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst and Wide Plus, both the organizational hosts of this event, I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to be part of the special Sankofa Gathering Part 1. This part is a looking backward portion to explore and assess how the collaborations between WIDE and eventually WIDE Plus in Europe, AllTwid, and other organizations related to the co-founders of the archives and Dawn evolved over the last 30 years. How did our conceptualization and analytical frameworks evolve? Our policy advocacy, our use of popular education and popular economics. Our part two conversation in April will take our reflections and invite us to apply them to our circumstances today. What is relevant? What is appropriate? What needs to be different? Where are there exciting examples of this being used to advance the issues we care about today? Our part one conversation today is going to be structured a bit differently than often a lot of conversations go. We are using what is called in the business a fishbowl style. So those who are going to be the primary speakers are going to be, let me just, um, able to talk. And in a minute or so, they're going to briefly introduce themselves to us all and state that they agree to be recorded. We also have a really, really awesome, very knowledgeable August body of observers. And observers, as Silke mentioned, please put yourself on mute if you have not yet done so. You will be invited observers, in fact, encouraged to, as much as you want, comment and ask questions in the chat. More on this in just a little bit later. Before we do the formal introductions, the planning team would like us all to take a moment and honor all of the people who, in a wide variety of ways, have contributed to the evolution of the advocacy, the organizing, the popular education, and the intellectual underpinnings of this work. Folks all around the world, all of those who have gotten us this far, known and unknown, currently alive, and those who have gone before us. Take a moment and, if you wish, bring someone to mind. Visualize that person or persons in your mind's eye. Let us take a moment, think of them, and breathe in and breathe out. Together, we hold them in our hearts and know that they are with us. Now for the fishbowl introductions. I'd like to invite each fishbowl member to say your name, your organizational affiliation, where you are zooming in from, and that you agree to be recorded. In order for us to go smoothly, I'll call on you and we're going to kind of go in alphabetical order. So beginning with the front of the alphabet. Carol, you are first.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Carol Barton. I'm in New York City. I've had different hats of organizational affiliation. One that was most linked to work that I did with many of you was the Women's International Coalition for Economic Justice, which ended its work around 2005. More recently, I've been involved with the Women in Migration Network, and I agree to be recorded.
Thank you. Elmira.
Oh, I'm next. Oh, wow. I'm Elmira. I live in New Jersey. Yeah, I'm also like from the dark ages, from all the way forward to the current moment of the feminist popular education, whatever it is we are at UMass Amherst. So long line of stuff.
And do you agree to be
Oh,
recorded?
and I agree to be recorded.
Thank you. Mariama, you're next.
Good morning, everyone. Afternoon, evening. Mariama Williams, currently in Florida. I'm from Jamaica, and have been engaged with this group and pretty much everybody in this group, seeing lots of familiar faces for a very long time. I'm now beginning my seventh decade as of March 4th. So I feel, yes, so great. I've been with Wide for some time, for Altwid, and now the Archives and Hub project. I'm a little bit groggy. Just got in from Colombia, so I'm not so coherent, but I hope to be as the morning goes on. Yeah, what else would I supposed to say? I do agree to be recorded. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Maria. And thank you for doing this on with short sleep. So, Maeve. Maeve.
Hello. I'll say first, I agree to be recorded because otherwise I'll forget them. Um, I am here as a former um, employee, and not which was Women in Ireland in Global Solidarity. It's a wide Irish platform. I think my first encounter with guys at the AM conference in Helsinki. I think I you then, Marianne. I love videos called So People. I am people's work I learned from and draw on over the years. Um, since I left, I've been working reproductive rights. So I work now with the Irish Family Planning Association, which is the Ireland Association, the International Planned Parenthood Federation. So still in this advocacy circle, still doing some of the international work, but focused on economy. Lovely day,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you. Next is Peggy.
Hi, I'm Peggy Antrobus from the Caribbean, currently living in Barbados. My main affiliation, and in fact, the most important affiliation, is DAWN, Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era. I was one of the founding members. I was general coordinator up until from 1990 to 96. Um, I'm officially retired. I'm now 90. And so, but an activist never retires. And so I couldn't resist. I can't resist anything to do with oral history. I agree to be recorded.
Thank you. Thank you, Peggy. Next is Silga.
Greetings, everyone. I'm greeting you from Berlin, Germany at the moment. I've been with White Plus since 1995, also quite a while. At that time, living and studying in New York City, then coming back to Europe, moving around Eastern Europe, and reconnected with Pam and Carol when I lived again for a stint of time in the US. So going back and forth. I think Mariama, Carol, and Elmira are really the people who brought me to economics education, popular education. So I will always be grateful for that. And I've, over the last decades, continued to work as an independent researcher, consultant, in whatever you want to call it, on economic justice, labor rights, social security, gender justice more broadly. So mostly based here in Germany. And I agree to be recorded.
Great, thank you. And next we have Wendy.
Thank you. Yeah, greetings, everyone. Lovely to see people I haven't seen for literally decades, so it's amazing. I agree to be recorded. I've just retired as a professor of gender diversity and sustainable development, about to move back to Italy. I'm now at the moment in The Hague. I joined WIDE in, would you believe, 1989, and I've been following it, I'd say, in the last years. When I move back to Italy, I'll be working with the Community Economies Institute, which J.K. Gibson Graham founded. And I am looking to reconnect now that I'll have time to do so. So this is amazing for me to be able to be here at this moment. So thank you for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to a wonderful discussion.
Great, thank you. And I'm Pam Spar. I'm, as we say in my locale, a proud resident of the People's Republic of Tacoma Park, Maryland, home of the lead impeachment manager of Donald J. Trump the second time around. Anyways, and where you don't need to be a citizen of the United States to vote in local elections, and that's legal. Anyways, enough of the political commentary. I have been a member of AltWid, which is my primary connection with the conversation today. Now, I'm going to just invite, can all of the fishbowl members wave vigorously to the observers and greet the observers, and then we'll have the
Pam,
introductions of
just
the
say you
observers.
agree to be
Oh,
recorded.
yes, thank you. I do agree to be recorded.
Thank
Hi,
you.
observers. Yay, welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay, so for the observers, we would like you please to put your name, your organizational affiliation, and where you are zooming in from in the chat. And we're all going to watch that happen for a minute or two. And then there'll be another way that we can, will introduce you. But please, again, your name, your organizational affiliation, and where you're zooming in the chat. And please message everyone, make that in the everyone category. All right, we have folks coming in. Please, again, yeah, just keep it coming. We can all watch. That's great. I think we have a few more people. Yeah, great. Fabulous. Has everyone? Okay. We'll just double check that. I am going to go down our list of observers, and if you are not have your video on, if when I call your name, if you're willing to please just briefly let us see you so that all of the fishbowl members can wave to you and give you a greeting. So again, we're going to kind of go from alphabetical order. Edme, are you here? Did Edme come? I don't. Yes, Edme. Hi. There you are.
Hello.
We're going to wave back to you. Great. Thank you. Oh, glad you're here. Aaron in Washington, D.C. Can we see you briefly? Hi, Aaron. Welcome. Thanks for being a part of this. Great. Next on the alphabetical list is Gia. Gia, are you here? Can we see you wave? Hi, Gia. Great. Thanks for being here. All right. Helen. Helen. Do we see Helen? Is she here? Um, don't see Helen yet. Oh, there's Helen. Hi, Helen. Thank you for being here. That's great. Um, Kinga, is Kinga here? Yes, hi, Kinga. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Liana, in a totally different, way different time zone. Thank you for fitting us into your schedule. Thanks a lot for coming. Lois, is Lois there? Okay. Hey, Lois. Thank you for being here. Welcome. Marianne, is Marianne here? There's Marianne. Hi, Marianne. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Okay. Um, Marlene Kim from Boston. Hey, Marlene, can you put your camera on for just a sec? Maybe not. Okay. Anyways, hi, Marlene. Thank you for being here. There she is. Hey, rockin', rockin'. Okay. Thank you. And there's a woman whose name begins with N, and now I'm not seeing it. She hopped off, maybe?
No, she's here. We're good.
Nilgun.
Nilgun.
There we go. Okay, sorry. There. Hi. Thank you. Glad you're with us. Okay. And Sarah? Sarah, can we hi,
Ah,
thank
she's
you
also in
so
the car.
much. Great. We take it wherever you can be. And I see there's another person here that I missed, actually two other people. Dunya? Hello, Dunya from Wide? Hi. There she is. Hey, great. Welcome, welcome. And Carla, hi. Welcome to Carla. There we get to see you. Great. Hi. Thanks for coming. So we have a really awesome, awesome.
Pam, sorry, there's still
Claudia.
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 Claudia from
Claudia.
White Austria.
Oh, great. Sorry, Claudia. Thank you.
Hi
Anyway,
everyone, great to meet you.
hi. Christina, did we get you?
No,
No,
you
we need to
didn't.
say
So hello everyone.
hola. Hi. Thank you. Glad you could be with us. Have I missed anyone else? Has everyone been introduced? Okay, great. So, please, observers, if you aren't on mute, put yourselves on mute. And I'm just going to quickly go over some housekeeping protocols, and then we're going to get into um, the conversation. Just want to say, for a variety of reasons, we will not be using artificial intelligence for this videotaping. That means we will have no automatic notes or transcription from AI. Instead, we're going to have an awesome human being taking notes, and that awesome human being is our partner, Carol Barton. So thank you, Carol. The everybody stream in the chat is considered public and will be preserved as part of the record of this recording. And so again, both the videotape and the everybody stream in the chat will be stored in our archives at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And they will be accessible to the public through the library. And also there's going to be a connection with Wide Plus. Observers and Fishbowl members, everyone feel free to comment, ask questions in the Everybody chat stream. And the chat function is going to be monitored by our awesome chat monitor and Wide Plus partner, Silke Steinhilber. So Silke is going to be monitoring that carefully. And she's going to feed into our conversation what's coming up in the chat. And so thank you, Silke, for that special role. Private chats where you direct your comment to one person are not going to be kept. So you have that in confidence. And I was thinking, it's too bad we don't know, or maybe you do. If you do, please make this happen, that some billionaire doesn't pay for us to all get together in a nice location and have a whole weekend to talk and reflect and record. So that means, unfortunately, we're going to have to be really tight with the time and our reflections. And so our clock hawk today, who's going to help me and help all of us stay on track, is our awesome partner in this project, is Elmira Nazombe. So thank you, clock hawk Elmira. And I know I'm already off, so I will get talking faster here. And I see someone already practicing using the emoji and the reaction emoji. Fantastic. Since speaking time is limited, feel free, if you agree with someone or want to emphasize a point for some reason, feel free to go into that reaction button and at any point and send an emoji up to affirm or emphasize what something there. Thank you, Silke, for demonstrating that process to affirm what someone has said. So, any questions about kind of the housekeeping part of this call? Okay, quick review of the agenda, and then we're going to get going. We're going to launch the storytelling in the fishbowl with reflections from 3 different geographical perspectives and organizations involved. We're going to start with Peggy from Dawn, then we're going to have Elmira from Altwood, and then Wendy is going to offer one from the Wide Plus perspective. We're then going to open it up to questions and comments and stories from the other fishbowl members. And then after a few minutes, we're gonna check back in with Silke, our chat monitor, and if she hasn't already brought things into the conversation that she's seeing in the chat, that will be a good chunk of time for her to do that, or for you to weigh in at that time through the chat, and we bring in your observations and comments that way. We'll then have a final round of conversation in the fishbowl, all focused on some specific questions related to popular education. And then in our last 15 minutes or so, we're going to have some closing comments and evaluations and a brief review of next steps. So I realize that we're going to pack a lot in, about an hour, hour and a half or so, and we'll do our best to be really juicy and focused. So it is my pleasure now to turn things over to our 3 storytellers to launch the conversation. And just a little background. We all have complex identities, and I'm probably making up this word, but anyways, I'll use it. Positionalities, if that's a word. And so our experiences and analyses of the past 30 years obviously have been profoundly shaped by the specifics of who we are and where we are. And so to launch this conversation, the 3 women who have graciously offered to launch it for us have very rich, distinct observations and stories to tell as part of launching our Sankofa conversation. We're going to start at the beginning of the timeline, which is when around the time that the 3 organizations in different years were formed, and then move from that space. And so our esteemed elder in this group, and again, unfortunately, I only have 5 minutes, so this is going to be a kind of a focused kind of one story, one piece of the reflection. our esteemed elder to launch us in that is Peggy Antrobus, co-founder of Dawn. Peggy, the microphone's over
Hi.
to you.
Hi. So, right away, how did we start? How did Dawn start? In preparation for the NGO conference that marked the end of the decade for women, the UN Decade for Women, the Indian economist, who many of you may know, Devaki Jain, invited to her home in Bangalore a group of women from the economic South, women she had met and worked with over the decade. The agenda was simply for these women to share our experiences of women over the decade, tell our stories. We didn't come with documents or research papers. We came with our own experience. And the question was, what had we learned about women during the decade? And in that very informal setting of a home and a wonderful experience of regional dishes, we talked about what we had experienced. The women from the Pacific and Claire Slater and Vanessa Griffith talked about the testing of nuclear weapons and the resulting environmental degradation that led to serious health issues for women in the Pacific, including giving birth to jellyfish babies as well as to loss of livelihoods. They all talked about the fact that they couldn't even discuss these damages in intergovernmental meetings because many of the Pacific Islands were still colonies, and that thereby allowing colonial powers like United States and France and even Australia to control the agenda. The women from Asia talked about religious fundamentalism and the ways in which this limited women's access to education and to participation in the economy and in public life. Now, coming from the Caribbean, I had never before experienced these issues being discussed in a fora focused on the status of women. The women from Africa were talking about the terrible drought taking place in the Sahel at the time and people dying of starvation. Well, I knew a little bit more about that. And the women from Latin America were talking about something called structural adjustment policies, a policy framework designed in Washington that was very detrimental to the lives of women, particularly to the lives of poor women. A policy framework that cut social services, sectors that employed predominantly women and provided services essential for women's work in taking care of their families, and then expected women to fill the gaps created by the cuts. In the context of our discussions here, and in fact, this just came to me in the preliminary meeting, it occurred to me that the meeting in Bangalore was an example of feminist participatory research, of feminist storytelling, of feminist consciousness raising, a combination of all of these things. The methodology of sharing our experiences of the regional differences, the different perspectives, that methodology is what allowed to emerge all the variety and the differences that the different dimensions of what Dawn called a crisis in social reproduction. As we talked about those, as we shared those different stories, the word crisis emerged as a theme. And then we continued discussing them, and we saw that those differences, apparent differences, environmental degradation, religious fundamentalism, structural adjustment, economic disempowerment and exclusion, they were all linked to a particular economic model, the growth model. That probably would not have happened in that way if we hadn't had that methodology of storytelling. 5 years later, at a meeting in Rio, the network decided that we would use this analytical framework to engage a series of global summits that the United Nations was about to convene on various topics throughout the decade of the 90s. And out of these themes, Dawn decided to focus on four. The first one was the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, held in Rio in 1992. Then the UN Conference on Population and Development, held in Cairo in 94, the Social Summit held in Copenhagen in 95, and of course the Second World Conference on Women held in Beijing later that year. Continuing with a methodology that would allow women to share experiences, we started by having someone who was knowledgeable about the issue write a concept paper. And then this was followed by a series of regional meetings in which the paper was critiqued from the perspective of that particular region. And again, out of that process would come an analysis of the issues that would be the basis of our advocacy at the particular conference or in the NGO space. So that our analysis really comes directly out of the experiences of women, poor women living in the South. I should say that Devaki was very firm about this, that it had to be women from the South living in the South. You couldn't be from the South and live in Canada or United States or in Europe. You had to live in the South because you had to experience the power outages, the lack of water, the hurricanes, the testing of nuclear. You had to actually feel that experience, even if you weren't a poor woman. This methodology, popular education, popular theater, participatory research, whatever you want to call it, ensured a deeper analysis than would have been possible, I think, using more mainstream research methods, and certainly much more effective in terms of the actions that need to be taken to change that situation. So I'm really thrilled that Pam, that you're convening this meeting to talk about popular education, because it is the methodology that allows us to come up with the best analysis of our situation. Thank you. Was that 5 minutes or more?
Slightly more, but it was within the parameters. Yeah.
Thank you, Elmira, for that. Very much appreciated, Peggy. And I'm sure we're going to add more to that, but it's a very important beginning and grounding point. So thank you. Now, Elmira, it's your microphone, over to you.
Okay. Well, I was trying to. All right. So you watch the time, so I don't talk too long. Well, the timing is sort of similar. In 1989, Maria Riley. Can you hear me all right?
Something happened to your camera. Now it's better. Yeah,
Okay.
because your camera was pointing down.
Oh, yeah, it was just like,
Now
okay,
it's fine.
we're good? Okay.
Yes.
In 1989, the wonderful and wise Maria Riley convened people who were meeting, who were working in Washington on issues of development. And some were academics and some were working for various development organizations. And the point of that meeting was to find a space where those women could talk together and give each other support for the difficult work sometimes of working in an organization as a woman in a minority place. So we also then developed a really interesting conversation about what women in development would mean and what gender in development was all about. And all of those things were a part of a really rich, a way in which we finally came to some really important conclusions, not only about ourselves, about the organizations we work with, but about the U.S. and what role it was playing in the world. So those were our beginning places, and ultimately that publication, Structural Adjustment U.S. Style, came out of that, and another one called Women Breaking Boundaries, those of which were kind of, we were groupies of Dawn, and in a sense, we were powerfully affected by what women outside were saying, and so Dawn was one of those places where we learned things and then tried to apply it to our own situation. So by the time we got to the 90s, our group then morphed into two groups, Altwood, Washington, and Altwood, New York. And because of the orgy of those conferences that the UN did, we then had a lot of different venues in which we could try to see what we were doing. So we learned stuff, but also we listened a lot. It gave us many opportunities for learning by being exposed to women from around the world. And I will just make a little tiny comment that what Peggy has just said about Devaki and what she said about the north-south business, this was a difficult thing for us we it meant on some levels nobody wanted to hear us because they thought we lived in Europe and North America, and we weren't authentic. But we took us many years to overcome that, and it would be an interesting conversation. The other thing that was missed in a lot of U.S.-based conversations and European conversations was the issue of race. So the things that we began by exposure in those UN spaces was, in fact, to raise those issues because those were critical to us, and we began to bring in a lot of grassroots women who were poor women living in the North who could talk about that in many ways. So the next kind of critical thing that happened, in addition to going to all those conferences, an orgy of conferences, it really got to be too much, but in about just 2000, we also noticed that small voices were not being heard over and against the other ones. So that's when the Women's International Coalition, when Altwood sort of morphed into the Women's International Coalition for Economic Justice, because that became a place where smaller voices that didn't get much play in other places would be heard. And so we had a wonderful time bringing in women from all around the world. We allowed the big people to come in, but primarily we wanted the conversation to be among some of the smaller groups. And that, I think, was a really important development because it deepened our thinking on many things around intersectionality and race, class, and gender, and let us talk about human rights and to, some correctives to the women's human rights movement, in a sense, is the other part that we did. So that was, we said, for 5 years. And so then, fast forward 20 years, and we created the feminist popular education, blah, 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 whatever we are at UMass Amherst. And we are in continuing that work, not only to remember all the things we've said, but to create a living space where we can continue to have these conversations. So that's where we've come in 30 or more years to value what it means to talk across identities into intersectional conversations, and what that means about deepening our insights and our commitment. The one thing that is clear to me, then that's the last thing I'll say, we have changed the name of these organizations multiple times, but we've never changed our fundamental commitment to believing in women's the ability to address social justice issues and to think about economic justice and to think about identity. I'm proud that we have. That is the stuff that we continue to work on. So that's me. So Wendy is next.
Okay, so shall I just jump in? Well,
Yep.
Thank you both, Peggy and Elmira. Yeah, I'm also going back into that distant time. For me, WIDE began when we actually got funding together from the EU to meet as people working in Women in Development, as it was called then. So it was Women in Development Europe. And right from the start, I think there was always tensions around which sort of Europe we were talking about, and whether we were talking about solidarity and critical thinking about development, or whether we're talking about how one did our job better in the organizations we worked for. So there was always that tension about were we positioning ourselves as European, or were we positioning ourselves in that sort of international agenda. But for me, I remember, like Elmira, dawn was an important source of thinking about what was wide about. And I recall many meetings, but I was just going to mention a few. One was the meeting before Rio, which was in Miami, which was a Women's Congress for a Healthy Planet, where indeed Wide was representing Europe. Amongst others, and there were different regional concerns. But I recall, for example, Peggy being part of a tribunal, which really looked at the many issues that Dawn was bringing to the fore, but also others, including many people, Marilyn Waring, Vandana Shiva, other people that we know really made us start to think about alternative economics, and also the link of towards environmental justice as well. And I think for me, that particular meeting, which then led into, as Elmira said, the orgy of conferences run by the UN, was a very important statement around the Earth Charter, but also around the different levels of intersectional feminism meeting in those very early days of 1991. And I often go back to that and look at that agenda, which was holistic, anti-capitalist, very aware of racism, completely concerned about environmental crisis. So I just wanted to mention that sometimes we do need these histories to recall that we're still fighting a lot of those battles. Then I just wanted to mention a few of the meetings that for me were important in terms of Altwit and Dawn and Wide coming together. One was a meeting in 1992 in Dublin. I don't know if Maeve recalls this, where we really were, I would say, forefronting a decolonial critique of globalization, talking through the whole issue of what was 1992 about in terms of the erasure of different cultures, not celebrating Columbus, but instead looking at the damage that had been done, and also raising those issues in connection to European the travelers in Ireland, Roma people in different parts of Europe. And I think, again, it was a very important meeting. I remember Peggy being there, giving some real insights into how one could network across different regions. I remember her drawing a diagram where she was talking about the different rings of connections, which I found useful, and I remember Wide also adopting as we thought about the different rings of connections and how we could network across differences as well. That was for me, again, a radical and interesting meeting, but also it underlined the need to understand issues of debt, structural adjustment, the problems of women's work not being valued, and the need for economic knowledge. And we formed an alternative economics working group, which Luce Westman, who I see is here, and Irena van Staveren led. And I remember in a meeting in 1995, not just leading up to Beijing, but actually thinking through these alternative economic concerns and how we would do it. There was a whole series of popular education meetings linked to that. I remember that particularly because Diane Nelson came and spoke and raised issues of male bias in development. But I also remember it because, if I can add, I was breastfeeding my daughter, who was 3 months old, on the stage, and that whole connection between care work and social reproduction and private public life was very visibly there. And my daughter's now 31 years old, so I also get a shock when I realize that sort of time. Maybe moving on to a couple of other meetings. Well, 2005 for me was also important because we were meeting in New York, reflecting on Beijing and being very concerned about how it didn't actually lead to all the promises that we had hoped. And I remember Gigi Francisco, who was someone I thought of when Pam asked us to bring someone into our minds as we reflected, who has really brought us together in the past. And I remember her work, and from Asian point of view, the issue again of care work, and particularly as someone living in Italy, the issue of the Filipina um, women's migrant groups, and how that was something that we hadn't brought into the wide thinking at that moment. It was an important meeting to raise those sorts of issues, which also, as Almira would understand, it was also a kind of invisibilized racism, that had excluded migrant thinking in the way that maybe now Wide Plus does, but at the time that was for me marked a new thing. Finally, as I'm also very conscious of people who are here, I remember when Carol invited me, or somehow I got invited to represent with Kinga Lohman the feminist dialogues at the World Social Forum. This had become another advocacy space away from the UN. And I remember Kinga and I going to Nairobi and meeting with Dawn, and I think we actually represented there somehow all of Europe and all of North America in those meetings. I always found that kind of, I don't know how Kinga thought about it, but I always felt very responsible. But it was a lovely reversal of the usual mainstream, where the sort of representative of the global South would appear. So it was a good lesson for Wide, I think, to learn about how to negotiate those North-South solidarity links, and also within Wide, the need to have someone from East and West Europe. I think that was also important. So I think that for me, the issues that I felt Wide Plus is now dealing with emerged from those early days, and were taken on. So not only about trade and the issues of globalization, but also these concerns around racism, who was included in women's movements in Europe, the idea that care and economics can't be somehow separated, and the idea also that we have to do advocacy, but we also have to work very hard to connect as organizationally in terms of solidarity, inclusiveness, etc. And I think Wide went on as Wide Plus to do a lot more of that work. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Juicy, juicy beginning. So, thank you to all of our three launchers of this conversation. And now we're going to open it up to all of the fishbowl participants to please reflect on what you heard, ask follow-up questions, and we'll do that for about maybe 10 minutes or a little bit less, and then we're going to check in with Silke and all of the comments and questions that are coming in the chat. So, Mariama, you're the one person that I'm aware of in this group who has, and did Mariama just leave us? Oh no. Dear.
You scared her off.
I scared her off. Oh, this is terrible. Okay, well, I've learned my lesson then. Okay, I will.
She'll come back.
I was just going to invite Mariama because she has been involved.
She's here.
Okay, great. Mariama, you have been involved with all three groups. So you straddle, three different organizations here over a very long period of time, and have been in many different roles internationally. Would you like, and then I will no longer play moderator in this way, but I just wondered if you immediately had any points you wanted to make, or further questions you wanted to throw in the there she is. Did you hear my question, Mariama?
Yeah.
I think we might be having technical problems with, oh, there she is. Okay. Mariama, did you want to say anything at this point in terms of reactions to the stories, given your experience with all three organizations?
Hi, sorry, my laptop died on me, so I had to jump on my desktop. You were saying something, or I'm interrupting, so please go ahead. I'll jump in.
Okay, I was just wondering, given that you had connections with all three organizations, whether you had um, something in particular from your vantage point that you wanted to add, and then otherwise we'll just open it up to the fishbowl.
Oh,
You can think about it and then chime in
yeah,
later.
I'll think about it because there's so much thing that was shared across Wendy, Peggy, and Umira. But I do agree with what Elmira signed off that regardless of where we were or what organization we worked with, the fundamental imperative was women's economic empowerment and economic justice and racial justice that we carried through. Um, for me, everything was I missed a lot of the pre-Rio discussions that both Wendy and Peggy talked about. And one of the things that was really critical for me in my popular ed work in the Caribbean and some work we did in South Africa was on globalization, right? To pick up on Wendy's thing about decolonizing the work. So we did a lot of work on globalization, and which led me to trade policies and so forth. And so which are some of the later things that Dawn and Wyatt became very much interested in, and maybe that will be part of the bigger the specific economic or popular economic work that we looked at. So, and I'll just drop that there and come back in as I listen to others.
Okay, great. Because one of the other organizations that got started kind of out of this work and a bit after Beijing was the International Gender and Trade Network, which some of you maybe have been involved with. So opening up to fishbowl folks, comments, questions, folks who haven't had a chance to speak. I can't believe everyone's quiet. My gosh.
I mean, I'll jump in here. I think, and I put it already in the chat, I think a few things are amazing to see in terms of continuity of questions. And I will maybe end up, Marlene from the Observers just put in the a question in the chat that I will probably end up with in some way. So there are a few themes like the environmental justice that Peggy mentioned as like a very early topic of concern that it's I mean, yes, we're living with capitalism, so that hasn't changed. So some of the injustices are the key injustices of capitalism haven't changed over the decades either. But I find it amazing how it was an early pillar of the mobilization of people in this group and the network we represent. I find that really interesting. And the same with Wendy's question about a point about very early on, the question being asked, which sort of Europe are we talking about? That stayed also with us as a very intense debate within White and then in White Plus. Are we talking about Europe as the European Union? Are we talking about Europe even within the European Union? Are we talking about the core countries? Are we talking about from the vantage point of the center, the dominant power center of Europe, or more the periphery where structural adjustment happened in similar ways as in some countries in the global South? So what Europe are we talking about? And what Europe also in the sense of how Europe changed over time as a result of immigration, for example, and as a result of anti-immigration more recently, I would say, the entire discourse around the fortress Europe. So I find it fascinating to hear you three in taking us through the history and to see how many questions have been with us for so long. And then I'll end with Marlene's question about, so what were the accomplishments of these great groups? I think it's an important question. Like, what kind of impact, whoever that we is, did we achieve? And to what extent did we follow agendas? To what extent were we able to impact agendas or set our own agendas? I'll leave it at that, but I find it amazing to see how much disruption and how much continuity at the same time is with us. And I'll hand over to Carol, who has her hand up.
Thanks, and thanks for that amazing setting the stage. A couple of thoughts. One, I consider myself first a popular educator. I'm not in the academy, but I do want to mention among several of us here the back and forth between the academy and those of us trying to do popular education work, grassroots women's movements. So one place for us in the founding of Altwood, New York, at least, was the New School for Social Research. And I mention it because Gita Sen was there and was bringing a lot of Dawn's thinking and this global South feminist perspective to some of us studying feminist political economy in the North. And Pam and Mariama and I were all there. I actually studied with Nilüfer Shatai, not with Gita, but the networks, and I know several of you are here, have been part of IAFE and the building of the academic side of this work. So I think I wanted to note those connections. I also wanted to note the connections with AWID. We have Marianne here from AWID, and we worked very closely in the second iteration of AWID, but Altwid was Alternative Women in Development and was a direct challenge to what AWID was at the time. AWID was sitting in Washington. It was professionals who worked at the World Bank and the IMF and in diplomacy, and it was women kind of trying to break a glass ceiling within the mainstream development world. And so we were taking that on in a frontal way and bringing grassroots women from around the world to the AWID to the formal AWID space. And I think if we want to talk about successes, we don't claim that as a success. I give the credit to AWID itself, but it's one of the few institutions I've ever seen in my life that completely reinvented itself as something driven by women from all around the world, as a feminist movement, rather than something that was to reinforce the dominant economic model. So I wanted to mention that. And another thing that I was thinking about in the process of this, Elmira talked eloquently about how we might have changed organizations along the way, but never changed the focus of our work. And I think that we also, as a movement, changed the immediate focus of our work depending upon what was the urgency of this intensification of neoliberalism. So in the early days, in the 80s, we were still fighting the idea of the imposition of neoliberal globalization. In the US, we were fighting NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and trying to keep it from being put into place. And then as it was put into place and as it evolved, we moved from debt crisis, the quote unquote third world debt crisis of 1983, and its expansion around the world and the creation of structural adjustment programs, into the creation of the WTO and the intensification of trade. And so then we kind of morphed into trade work. And I think that the work now that you just mentioned, Silke, of a real focus on migration and on climate and on war and conflict around extractivism, resource extractivism, are the logical outcomes of 40 years of neoliberal economics. And so we are now, as global feminist movements, focused on that. And it's not that we've changed who we are and what we do, but we're responding to this evolution.
Carol, can you wrap up, please?
Okay, yeah. The last thing I would say is that I really did want to underscore the point Elmira made about, well, all of you have made about both the North-South tensions and contradictions, but also coming together and listening and building collective analysis in ways that have strengthened all of us and changed our analysis, and the centrality of race and the work that many of us were involved in around the World Conference Against Racism as using as a space to kind of put race more centrally on the agenda. And what you mentioned, Wendy, about migration becoming something center stage. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry. Maeve has had her hand up. Okay, so Maeve and then Wendy. Maeve.
Sorry, I'm just unmuting myself. Yeah, thanks for all of that. I must say I'm finding it quite emotional to hear so many names of so many inspiring people, and just have so many recollections of just the richness, just the immense richness and ambition of the organizations of Wide and Dawn and Altwid, and then also the IGTN and WeSedge or YSedge. I never knew how to pronounce it. And just all of these amazing organizations. And I think part of the achievement was the ambition. I think the ambition of feminist critique of global economic structures and neoliberalism was just, it was an achievement in itself. And it was exceptionally visionary. From the Benulocht perspective, so Benulocht formed in 1993, 94. So I don't think Benulocht was involved in that 1992 conference. I was in Spain or Latin America at the time, so I have no recollection of that conference in Dublin. But Benulocht formed at a time when Ireland still had a stagnant economy, and where there was a degree to which some activists were really working within the frame of Ireland as being, to use the term of the third world country, because Ireland, having been a colony of Britain, and among European countries never having had colonies, and certainly personally, it was often very strange in any meetings where I was representing Wide to feel that I was supposed to be representing the kind of Western European perspective when Ireland was still so peripheral. And then since then, Ireland fully embraced growth-led economics and neoliberalism and all the bad things that come with that, and sort of embraced an economic self-colonization to the US and to multinationals, and then ended up being restructured by the IMF after the economic collapse in 2008. Also, Benulocht started as a coalition of community development organizations and non-governmental organizations working on sort of overseas development, to use that term. And it came together as an independent entity in the context of abortion and abortion rights coming up to Cairo. Because many of the organizations, which were faith-led, didn't have, well, had an anti-abortion position. So the feminist women in those organizations came together and brought together this, I think, quite a unique combination in Ireland anyway, of community development and locally grassroots-based organizations and overseas development. And again, at a time of tremendous stigma, and I think, again, very visionary to look both at reproductive rights and bodily autonomy, but also economic structures, and looking at all of the ways in which patriarchy and capitalism trap women in cycles of poverty and disempowerment. And then through the links with Wide, we also developed an understanding of race and North-South global relations that became really important. And that was brought in also by people like Mary McAvoy, who was one of the academics who was involved at the time, and people like Penny Cabot and Mary Van Lieshout, who people might remember. And so what I think for us, that decolonial perspective was really powerful in the way we connected with Wide. And through Wide, we in Ireland were able to connect with organizations like CAFRA, the Caribbean Association for Feminist Research and Action, the Tanzanian Gender Networking Program, as well as AWID and WeSedge or YSedge, and all of these other entities, the International Gender and Trade Network. And one of the ways that we kind of did decoloniality at the time was to invite these wonderful feminist leaders like Nelsia Robinson from CAFRA, like Mary Ruzimbi from TGMP, Joanna Kerr also from AWID, to come and lead our learning, and very much as to use that to draw the perspectives of lived experiences in the South and lived experiences in kind of grassroots deprived communities in Ireland, and that was a way of working to really kind of bring the analyses of patriarchy, race in inverted commas, and capitalism, and develop an understanding and analysis of the structures we were living within. I want to give a shout out as well to Emily Kawano, who worked with us very closely when we were she brought her Marxist perspective and to economic literacy, and we sort of tried to mesh a Marxist and a feminist perspective. So just again, just to thank you all for all of those years. It's and all of that richness that so many people on this call, but through the wider Wide and Dawn and Altwid networks, and also We Do, brought to helping us to develop an analysis and supporting a vision that I really think, as I say, was an achievement in itself, and something very, very powerful and to be treasured. And I'm very grateful for this oral history project to have the opportunity to reflect on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Maeve. Thank you. Wendy, you had your hand up a while ago. Did you want to say something?
Actually, I was applauding Maeve, I think, but I just did add in the chat. This is just not really that important, but Mary McAvoy was the person who organized the meeting in 1992. And I like to think we talked about a Banalap arriving. So it took a little while, I hear, but I do think it was a very powerful, it wasn't a conference, it was a meeting. And it was one of those feminist ways of organizing, which allowed people to think of how to move forward. And it definitely was in solidarity I mean, I remember, as I said, Peggy being there, but there were others from Dawn. And I do remember this sense of things were possible to change in a way that meeting in UN spaces didn't give. So I just wanted to add that to Maeve, but it was a beautiful reflection, Maeve. Thank you very much.
I would like to quickly step out of my facilitation role and just offer a little reflection about accomplishments, and then we're going to move into our next piece, which is reflecting on pop ed and popular economics. One piece of the collaboration between the three groups we haven't talked yet much about is it's one thing in terms of our work in convening meetings, doing policy advocacy work at various international levels, writing publications. I think one of our accomplishments, at least for those of us in the US, was Altwid producing some of the, I think, first meant to be popularly accessible feminist analyses of various aspects of trade, like what does feminism have to say about exchange rates, for example, that I think were helpful. But what struck me is no one has brought up an example of where we actually physically had to put our bodies on the line for what we believed. And for me, that collective experience with Altwid, with Wide, with Dawn was in Seattle at the WTO meetings in 1989. And each kind of in addition to the formal meetings, of course, there was a huge NGO presence from all around the world with various kinds of planning meetings and educational activities happening, and we certainly were part of that in different ways. But what I wanted to share was two specific pieces. One was that in terms of putting our bodies on the line, each day of the gathering, a different movement was responsible for organizing any kind of public protest related to what was happening at the WTO meetings. And for those who were not aware, anarchist groups in Seattle were very active and very violent. And so pretty close to the start, the police were out. And in some ways, for me, physically, we're reliving that somewhat in the United States now. So there were troops, eventually there was tear gas. And at one point, the Seattle police force put a no speech zone around the building where the formal WTO meetings were, so that there could be no protests there. So the movement that had the day's responsibility for organizing protests, the day after that no speech zone was declared, were women. And so that meant Don and Wide and us and a lot of others were responsible for doing that. And so we decided to have a protest where anyone from the NGO world that was there would gather, and we would march from a United Methodist Church, which happened to be the centerpiece for a lot of the NGO activities, whether they were secular or faith-based, and go and stand toe to toe with each person facing directly a police officer. And we'd have blue tape or a scarf around our mouth, and for 1 hour stand silently in lines, one person facing each police officer. And I remember calling my boss at work in the women's division and saying, Lois, is it okay? The next time you're going to get a call from me, I might be calling from jail. And there was a long pause, and then she finally said, yes, go. And it was very incredible that the women led that first resistance against the police presence and the shutdown of protest. The other is a very great photograph, which was a protest eventually led a few days later by groups from the global South, and Wide and Don and us from Altwood all marched together. And there's a wonderful photo of Gigi and others from Don, and this is because I have the photo, it's one that includes me, and we all have toothpaste under our eyes and under our nose, because at that point in time, that was the only thing that anyone could think of to help us protect ourselves when the tear gas was going to come. And so we're holding a Dawn sign with toothpaste all over our faces to protect us. So I just offer that because at times we haven't talked about actually doing direct political action together as the three organizations. And I just want to say, at least from my experience, that's the one time that I was involved where that occurred. And it was very, very powerful because there was something like 30,000 people at the WTO meeting. It was like the size of the Beijing conference. So I thank you for allowing me to share that. So Mariama, and then we're going to shift to a new realm of questioning here.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. Thanks for bringing that up. And just wanted to flag, as Gigi was mentioned, that Gigi Francisco was very important and probably saved me from jail or death because of her experience of the Philippines. When on the night going back home, we were confronted by police who blocked our way and started to instigate actions with us. And Gigi, because of her knowledge and experience, was able to help contain me and my reaction. And we were able to get through that situation safely. So I just want to flag Gigi San Francisco, who also led Dawn in the IGTN. But prior to that, I wanted to flag something before you brought it up about how we work as women's group or group divided to gender and so forth. What happened, we need to track it down to see if I could find, maybe Joan Grant may have pictures of it, because I'm not sure if people are aware that in the social summit, the out of the Women's Caucus, which was at that point led by NAC, Dawn, and a number of groups, many of us stage a hunger strike, a fast in the Bella Center, because the meeting was getting to a tense point where it was not moving. And it was the meeting remember, Social Summit was right before Beijing March. And there are many of us who felt that if certain issues didn't get resolved there, it would make problems with Beijing. So coming out of the Women's Caucus, Joan Grant and a number of us began, we wanted to protest. We were told we couldn't protest inside the UN. It was the Bella Center in Copenhagen. So what we later found out we could do is that we could sit and we could have posters laying around us, and we fasted, and people come in and out all day. So many of us fasted. There's a core group of us that fasted for about a day and a half, 2 days before the heads of state came in, heads of state coming in, and we were sitting there. Others would come in and join for 2 hours fasting. And we had posters scattered all around us, expanding out in the Bella Center, where people would come and write what issue they were concerned about. And I remember heads of state coming in, and we were still sitting there. Nobody attempted to move us. And they inquired what we were doing. I remember PJ Patterson from Jamaica and others coming over, and we gave them our, what it is that we thought was important. And so that's something that, need to track down, that, in addition to doing all our paperwork and stuff, we actually were doing nonviolent action and activism within the context of the UN, because there was that loophole that said you could, as long as people weren't standing and holding posters, you could have an action. And so we did a fast in the UN, and people lay down posters. And I remember even Danish police officers would come and write on our posters. It was a kind of interesting phenomena of that thing. But yes, we have a long history of doing political action, along with the political analysis and the lobbying and so forth. And those things need to be captured. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Mariama. Yeah, also there was a curfew every night in Seattle was imposed after like the first or second day. Let us just quick check. Silke, are there anything in the chat that you want to bring up before we shift to conversation about popular education per se and a focus?
No, there's a lot of appreciation expressed in the chat for the memories, for the names, for the for the a lot of fascination on how this brings up memories in the sense of oral history, and nothing else I would like to highlight at this stage. Please, people in the observers round, feel free to comment or ask questions or note something. I'm just going to post a few quotes that I wrote down that were highlights of my past hour, but please, others, come in.
Okay.
Nothing else at this stage, Pam.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on. We have about 20, 25 minutes to kind of focus more specifically on popular education and popular economics as a central tool, and how we use that in certain situations, and what the impact was. And we're going to keep Marlene's question very much in mind in terms of thinking where we could see impact or a positive effect. And what did we learn? What did we observe over doing that over 30 years? And is anyone in the, we have a hand up in iPad 5. Not sure.
This is Sarah.
That's me.
No, this is, yeah,
Peggy.
go ahead.
Okay, Peggy, please.
No, before we move too far away, I wanted to just make two things that I should have emphasized in my presentation. One was I wanted to mention the title of our platform document that came out of that meeting in Bangalore, Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era, Third World Women's Perspectives authored by Geeta Sen and Karen Brown. So it was not a report on what was said at the meeting as such. But the ideas that had emerged there were all woven together by Geeta. The other thing I wanted to say was that we didn't use the word intersectionality then, but I think that the most important thing that Dawn did was to remind or to make the point that you could not look at women's lives outside of the context of their government policy framework and outside of the reality of colonialism. So we didn't use the word intersectionality, but that I think, and racism, because I remember in Nairobi, the official, and also in Copenhagen, the US delegations were very fond of saying, these are political issues. They have nothing to do with women. So the conference is too political. And I don't know how you talk about women without talking about power relations. So it just continues because I gather that it's still being debated and excluded, that you're not allowed to talk about power relations, either between men and women or between rich and poor or between countries in the sacred halls of the UN. Okay, that's all I wanted to say before we got too far away.
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you. Who would like to launch us in terms of a great story about using popular economics, pop ed in one of your activities and the impact that it had? Oh no,
I guess I can only repeat my deep and heartfelt thank you to Mariama, Carol, and Elmira. You changed my life in some way. I mean, you put me on some track for the kind of educator I want to be through I don't even remember which workshop it was, and if it was one or if it was different ones. But thank you. It did at least I don't know about impact globally, but impact on a very personal level. Thank you.
Silke, do you remember some specific part where you had an aha or how it changed your life?
I stayed with the aha method ever since. And I think in different ways I'm using it, but I think it's just such a powerful tool. And the way I saw you lead us through, but there were other moments, but yes, the aha method definitely. And the three of you did change how I wanted to be an educator.
Well, the aha method is a very favorite one of those of us in the archives and hub. It's a visual analytical process. I won't say more, but it is designed to hopefully, if it works well, for at least a few people to have major ahas. So Carol, I see Carol is, of course, a major champion of the aha process. So over to you, Carol. Your hand's up, I see.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. I wanted to say something about some of the evolution of our thinking, because as globalization was hitting and the push for these free trade agreements, et cetera, a lot of the work that some of us were doing in different institutions where we worked was around economic literacy. And I think that was one of the big, so to speak, ahas coming out of Nairobi, where a grassroots delegation of women from the US went, and they were hearing the Dawn analysis and women of the global South from, living in very poor situations, yet having a very clear analysis of structural adjustment. And women, grassroots women in the US were like, we don't understand any of this. We don't understand economics. We don't understand the conversations. We need to, find a way to get a handle on this. So colleagues of ours, including Pam and Barbara Weaver and others at the United Methodist Women, helped to launch a network called the Women's Alternative Economics Network that was really focusing on doing that kind of storytelling, learning from each other across different racial groups where women had never necessarily talked across communities. And there was a lot of focus on economic literacy. And I think that one of the big evolutions for some of us was really beginning to understand more about the essence of Paulo Freire's methodology of popular education, that was not so much how do we help you understand globalization in this way or that way, which is very valid and we continue to do it. It's important. But to start with a community and just say, what are the urgent issues for you? And from the community begin to build a collective analysis. And I just wanted to say that we did that, and many of you were part of it in the Women's International Coalition for Economic Justice, because we were coming together across North-South, across class, across race, across different experiences. We had migrant domestic workers from Vancouver, Canada, and the Women of Color Resource Center, and then the big groups like AWID and We Do and Dawn and Wide, all at the same table and doing that kind of popular education. I think one thing it did was to put us on the same level. So we didn't have experts in the room, even though we had a lot of experts with a lot more knowledge than some others. It values the experience that everybody brings as the expertise. And I think that that helped transform our analysis. And the last thing I wanted to say is about sort of a story that to me was a really important one. Clearly in the US, we were struggling with issues around race and class and north-south and positionality. And Elmira and I were invited to go to Järvenpää, Helsinki near Helsinki in 1997 to the WIDE annual meeting to lead this AHA process. And it's about a day-long process, and it is popular education in that the group itself sets the agenda of what it is they want to talk about. But it was, for me, in my relationship with WIDE and my relationship with Europe, really one of the first times I saw WIDE struggling with what was happening in terms of neoliberalism and structural adjustment policy in Europe. And so we spent an entire day or maybe 2 days unpacking the way the social safety net was being destroyed and pulled apart in Europe. And so suddenly a group that had first been set up, particularly looking at how do we be in solidarity with the global South, was understanding the realities. And there were migrant women workers as part of it who were naming the issues around race and the struggles that you've already talked about, and that could come up in that process. So I just wanted to tell that story and really say that Pop Ed has been a central part of the way that we've done this work, just as you all have also said that bringing our feminist sensibilities and style and storytelling, as that you began with, Peggy, has been essential to our ability to come to AHAs and build an analysis that, then takes us into the streets.
Thank you, Carol. Mariama.
I just wanted to flag two places. I'm not claiming huge accomplishment, but I think there are two sites that were very important for me. One was in the US, where we use popular education methodologies to work with groups of women welfare rights activists in Seattle, people from the coal mining area in Virginia, Black women and Latino women, Mujer Rivera and so forth, working on chicken poultry and tech and clothing thing. And that was under the Lucy Parson Initiative. That was a project of the Funding Exchange. And also including Indigenous women, and led by Deborah Harry and other people like that. And those are powerful methodologies. We had people there that spoke Chinese, Spanish, and we had to have a whole process of getting people to do analysis, to share their stories. And the popular education methodologies was one way of bringing that together and bringing people to share and to draw closer. Also, in the initial stage after South Africa, when South Africans was going through their own version of what we in Latin America would call structural adjustment, because the World Bank and all these people had been there right after the new government taken over. In fact, the US had people in the finance ministry. So did a lot of work with community groups explaining how that worked, and they then took off on their own struggles. So I think the popular methodology has been quite useful in varying circumstances and bringing different people together, different walks of life, different perspective, different culture, helping to mitigate language barriers to a certain extent. Still requires a lot of time and investment, as we know. So yeah, I would just say that the methodology itself of popular education, popular economics, has been quite useful, and in trade, of course, you know, and I'm still using that even in climate change. So yes.
Great, thank you. Just want to give a shout out that Marlene Kim, who's in the observer pool, was part of one of the groups that Mariama was talking about, and Carol talked about in terms of she was part of Just Economics, which was part of the Women's Alternative Economic Network. So we have connections also with folks in the observer team here that have those same stories. Maeve, over to you.
Thanks. And thanks to Carol for bringing Paulo Freire into the fishbowl. So certainly that the methodology, and I suppose the feminist emancipatory education was the way that we termed the work that we did in Benulach. And that methodology, I think, was so powerful in allowing us to kind of create a framework where locally based women's groups or women's networks could kind of reflect and use a social analysis framework to reflect on their experience and their mothers and grandmothers' experiences of barriers to access to the workplace, to the labour market, and to economic and social rights more generally, and use that to sort of develop a critique of the prevailing neoliberal economic policies. And one of the things that sort of links my current work on sexual and reproductive health and rights with that work with Benulach was one of the critiques that we used to work through with groups was our government at the time was sort of on a world trip of showing off its progressive policies of having the world's most open economy and the world's fastest growing economy. And so before that all led to disaster, as you know, anyone in this fishbowl and this conversation would have seen at the time that that's where it was going. It was really interesting to reflect on that, the idea of Ireland sort of sharing this. This was the big sort of gift to countries in the South, is the lessons from Ireland's economy. And in fact, there was a really powerful lesson from Ireland about women's empowerment related to the economy, and it was about how contraception and access to reproductive health allowed women to participate and ensure that women weren't trapped in, or sort of helped women to escape cycles of poverty. Now we've only recently kind of moved towards full sexual and reproductive health and rights, but at the time those parallels were really powerful. I think to see the government claiming that it was economic policy that was driving prosperity in Ireland, whereas what most women experienced was that it was women's entry into the workforce had an equally strong claim to be a driver of economic development. So and that came, the sort of methodology of drawing out those critiques and working through those critiques came very much from that model of feminist emancipatory education. And thanks to Carol and Mariama, I think my starting point was those workshops in Järvenpää in Finland. And I just want to recall Hilke Pietila, who was the Finnish-wide representative at the time, who I think organized that event, or certainly hosted that event.
Thank you.
Pam, there are two comments or two issues in the chat that I would like to highlight. One is thanks, Christina, for pointing us to the World March of Women. as a movement that combines popular education with arts and economics, and is still marching. So as kind of a sister and to some extent related movement, and to highlighting how popular education is still needed. And then Mariama's recollection on how PubEd was useful, that prompts kind of a question to what extent it still is or is feasible. And that relates me to Gea's comment about if or to what extent popular education has to be or has to respond to a transformed context, or is already responding to a transformed context through digitalization and through through greater global awareness. And that's supported by, or another point by Wendy about AI and the AI generation. So how, like, what is the possibilities and the demands on popular education and in the digital era, and in a time where global awareness is much more, or knowledge and knowing about each other, at least at the level of information, is much more widespread. Maybe that's something we'll take into the next conversation. I just wanted to point out that there has been this conversation in the chat.
Fabulous. Those are excellent questions, very appropriate. And I would say let's definitely, I mean, we could have a whole 2-hour conversation just about that. Let us definitely take them into our part 2 conversation in terms of the implications for now and what it means for doing this work. Excellent. Thank you for getting Gia and Wendy getting those generated and identified as really important questions. We have about 5 minutes more in terms of stories about particular examples of where this work was done that had a powerful impact.
I can add one self-critical point that a few of us are now trying to trace a bit more within White Plus, is really to find out how in fact was the more economic literacy rather than popular education, but this educational tradition within White, how it in fact, what kind of impact did it achieve, and where it was taken, because some argue that there was too little emphasis paid on really planning for impact in the putting together material, and doing trainings of trainers, and how well did we actually think about impact and plan for impact, or yeah, and trace impact. So just to tell you that this is a conversation that is going on at the moment amongst some of us here, and connected to this group.
Very insightful and important observation. Maybe we can note for another question for part 2 is how do we do a better job of measuring impact? I mean, and of course, sometimes there's ways to see potentially more individual personal impact, as for example, your testimony, Silke, about how being in Finland at that training really turned you on to the powers of PubEd. Sometimes looking at the longer term impact, unless it's done very intentionally, is perhaps a bit harder to see. Carol.
Yeah, on impact, I'm trying to wrestle with it. I don't have a clear answer, but I think as a sort of what they call theory of change now, but as a sense of how change happens, so much of it does happen by the leadership of women at the local level, and perhaps impacting national levels. And we've been talking about how we came together across regions or internationally. And so a good deal of the work we specifically did together was impacting international spaces. But the work that we were doing through the cross-fertilization got back to places like Maeve shared about in Ireland, right? Or it got back to the places Mariama shared about of coal mining workers in Appalachia. And so we haven't measured all the ways that those women who were able to plug into these international spaces then went back and transformed their communities with a wider analysis and a wider vision. But I think that that's probably, if we want to measure change, that's probably where the change is most likely to happen. One of them for us is a sister, Denise O'Brien, who is a farmer in Iowa, and got pushed into the crisis of small farms in the United States disappearing, and began to do a feminist analysis of what was happening for women in agriculture, and then was able to jump into this space of challenging the former AWID, and then jump into spaces and in the WTO space, and continued to bring that back to her local community and a local group that she founded there. And so I think that she's an example of people plugging in at these international levels, but not making the international the be all and end all, because we know that we may advance vision, but we don't advance the change on the ground. So some thoughts, at least.
Thank you, Carol. Wendy.
Thank you, everyone. I wanted to add, perhaps because that's the realm I've been in, which is also education itself in terms of academic education and in schools, and how important it has been to link this work into those other arenas, and how it's very difficult necessarily to measure it, but just to say that a lot of this work has now gone into how people are teaching international relations, international development, feminist studies, etc. And I sort of saw my role as trying to cross those boundaries by bringing that work in as work that you could study. So and look at, and then take back. In my case, teaching international studies students back to their home. So I think that's also going on as well. And I don't want to raise it as a sort of, it's just a parallel or something that is merging with, and the work that people have done here is not just, it is within academic work as well. And academia, I've just finished doing my valedictory all about the politics of teaching, and the ways in which a lot of what I learned here I could bring into the classroom. And I think a lot of people, my colleagues anyway, at ISS certainly were doing that. And there are other spaces as well, including, of course, the fact that we're recording this oral history for a university. And I wanted to say we need to shore up some of those spaces. It's not a major thing maybe for all of you, but it's certainly something that by joining the Community Economies Institute, we're trying to create these parallel research, interesting spaces that can support particularly younger people who are trying to teach alternatives and otherwise, etc. I think that's also just something to flag up, that this is not so divorced from a lot of those debates. But that's perhaps a personal opinion here. But I do see portions of academia as political spaces still.
Okay. Wendy, that's very great. And if people would like to listen to your valedictory lecture, is that available?
Yes, it is. But yeah, I'm happy to share if people are interested. But that I didn't want to say it for that reason. I was just saying more that I think education and teaching, and I've learned from all of you, and that I speak about this in the valedictory. Actually, that's the point. As
Well,
important.
yeah. Hence, it'd be great for us to connect with that.
Sure.
So if
Okay.
you can share, that would be lovely. I'm
I
not
wanted-
sure, Elmira? And
Yeah,
then
just
Mariama.
just a little FYI, the way that we initiated the cooperation with SCUA, with the archives at UMass Amherst, was to do a public demonstration of the AHA. With students. So I mean, it's just so that was, and because we felt like that would help students and the university understand the value of popular education. So it was kind of the way our collaboration with them really began. And maybe I didn't say that when we were doing it, but when I was talking about it, but it was really cool, and we got really good response, and faculty people got excited. The dean got excited. Our friend, the dean, she got excited about all of the dean of the library. So and I use it. I've been teaching for the last 15 years, and I use it as often as I can because it makes my teaching interesting and not boring.
Great. Omar, can you please just put your camera a little bit so we can see your full face? Great, thank you. Mariama.
Picking up on Wendy's point and Carol's and Elmira, just wanted to flag in this discussion a number of places when we think about accomplishments. And I mean, we need to talk more specifically about how you define achievements in a context in which there are multiple entities working across the same terrain and struggling with similar ideologies and techniques. But I wanted to flag that one of the success to me, I think, is I was recently, about 2 years ago, on a WTO panel on gender within the WTO. So that's been for good or for bad, the WTO has taken on gender, and that came out of the work of many of the groups here who actively brought that issue to the WTO, including led by WIDE and Women's Strategic Summit and a whole host of groups. And Helen was here earlier, so she would be critical to that. But there was a man who presented, a very straight-laced looking economist. And he came up and he says, I got into this gender work by reading all of your gender positions, all of the group's positions. He didn't mean me. He meant gender activists. So we have actually influenced male economists to take a look at it and other economists. I also want to flag out, taking a broader landscape of popular economics, the work that was done by Nilofer and Maria Sergi and Karen Brown and Butch Montez in launching the International Gender and Macroeconomic Projects, which utilize both academic and popular economics work, bringing together young professionals in ministries across the global South over a 3-week period at University of Utah for about 3 years. And I've created people who I see now who are working in their governments on gender issues, from taxation to macroeconomics and so forth. So there's a wide scope from which we can look at how these methodologies and techniques we've been used have been incorporated in different places in different settings, and the wide spectrum of the influence that it has had in influencing even younger groups that are now looking at macroeconomics, which they formerly wouldn't have. So they need some specific research maybe to look at some of these issues. But from where I stand, and I've been in a lot of places where people have come up and said, oh, just like Silke, I saw you this, or I saw Carol, or I saw Pam Spar, or, I saw Irena Van Stavern, who did this, and so forth. So, yeah, so the influence over the years has been quite specific in many cases and quite dispersed across even the discipline, across and within discipline.
Thank you, Mariama. That's very helpful. Just to add, in addition to the kind of macro impacts, I think sometimes I reflect on the fact that as we're doing popular education, that sometimes the impact is not what we planned for and is not what we expected, but is far more profound. And I was thinking about experience I had doing a week-long workshop with United Methodist Women, and it was involving a lot of participatory action research and related to environmental justice issues. And as we were going around the group at the end of the closing of our time together, everyone was invited to reflect about what they're taking away from that experience. And one of the women in the group was a Hmong woman from actually the Twin Cities area of Minnesota, where there's a large Hmong community. And she said, the most important thing for me out of the week, I learned I have a right to ask questions. And certainly as a Hmong woman, refugee, and given the situation that she grew up and lived in, and now living in the United States, for me, I said, that's it. I didn't say it to her face, but I felt like one could not ask for anything more, but for someone to feel much more personally empowered to live in the world. So,
I just wanted
unfortunately,
to add one comment from the chat that fits very nicely, and it was by Christina, who said we're up against a powerful system, but in much of our impact may be on the individual. So there's a challenge to measure, to see, to trace. But I find this thought really helpful. Thank you, Christina. So.
anything else coming from that? Because we're now going to kind of
There's
move
a
into
lot
the
of
benefit.
there are a lot of hints and tips. Please, people, have a look at the chat. But yeah, and on the importance of different venues and places where popular education is happening. So we'll go back and look at it again. What of it may be also useful for the second conversation? Other than that, I don't think I have anything to bring to this round from the chat at this stage. Pam, we can move toward the last
Thank you.
closing part.
Okay, great. This has been a really incredible time, very rich, and also where in some ways we just kind of skim the surface. There's so much more that we can go in terms of sharing particular stories and examples and additional points in the timeline of our collaboration. And on behalf of the planning team, I just want to say thank you, and we are greedy. We would love to hear more and have the timeline added to and all of your experiences reflected in this, particularly, of course, folks who have been observers. And so there are two ways that we would like to lift up to invite you if you are inspired or would like to add more of your own perspectives and experience to this. One way is if you are personally willing to be interviewed on Zoom or either individually or perhaps with someone else from um, your organization. We're happy to set this up. Just let me know and we can do that, and we'll add that oral history along with this conversation to the archives. This offer is good only until May 15th. It does have a boundary, but again, a lot of you have very rich, interesting lives. We all do. And so if you would like to have time yourself to reflect, happy, just be in touch with me and happy to set that up. Secondly, you may like to write more than talk, or you might like to do both. If you would like to write your feelings, reflections, add missing information in writing, that then we can also add to the written timeline, which will be a narrative timeline, or have a photo. For example, I'm going to add the photo of us with the toothpaste at the Seattle Battle of Seattle to the timeline. So if you have photos or written reflections you'd like, again, please send them to Silke because Silke is helping to add things to the timeline, and CC me and they will go in. And again, you have until May 15th to do this because we're also going to invite people who were at part 2 to do it as well. So again, please do not be bashful. We would love to gather more because clearly the more perspectives, more experiences make it a richer, more valuable and juicy document. Any quick questions about your opportunities to have your perspectives and information included? Okay, and again, if you have any questions, see Silke or me. Um, Again, as Silke mentioned, everyone here is invited to part two. That will be at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on April 14th. And that is going to be the current and forward-looking part of the Sankofa conversation. If for any reason you don't want to come or you can't come to it because the date is a conflict, please let Silke and me know because we're trying to get a good handle on who will be attending. Um, on the other side, if there's someone you think, gosh, it would be really great to have this person be part of the part two conversation, please send that name and contact information to Selka and me. Again, it would be really great to either hear your about not being able to attend or someone else you think would be good to attend. If you could let us know in the next week or so, that would be great because we'd like to see all the suggestions that you might have about who else to invite in one go and make a decision in one go about that. And because we're also going to have to be kind of weighing how many people because we want to keep it a manageable number so that everybody can actually feel that there's time to be heard because that conversation is going to be an old-fashioned, totally open conversation, not a fishbowl. So again, if you for participation, please let Selka and me know in the next week or so. Now we have just a few minutes left, and this is for everybody, both observers and fishbowl people. Please go into the chat. And we would love to hear from you in a word or two. How are you feeling as a result of participating in this conversation? So just type in, how you're feeling. And also, if there's at least one thing that you want to make sure that we talk about in April about the current moment and how to use pop ed, please type that in terms of a question or um, um, a quandary or something. So again, how you're feeling and anything you want to make sure we cover in part two. And we'll give you about a minute or so to do that, and then we'll just have our closing. So again, please don't be bashful, and it doesn't all have to be glowing. If we really missed it in some way, please, you feel free to point it out. Silke, have we heard from most everybody in terms of reactions and feedback?
I think we are. I think my computer is slower than people in typing, so that it's really still coming in. But I think most people have actually sent in comments. So thank you very much. Greatly appreciated.
Okay, thank you. And also, please, if like tomorrow something comes to mind and you go, oh, geez, I want to share this, please feel free to email Silke and me any further reactions, comments, and suggestions, whether about this part one or about part two. And we want to, as on behalf of our whole team, we just want to say thank you so much. I know for some of you it is late at night, or you need to be with your family, or you should be somewhere else and doing something else. So thank you so much for taking this time and participating. We feel very honored. We look forward to seeing as many of you as possible and interested in part 2. Thank you for being so inspiring. And on behalf of the team, take good care, stay safe, be well, and be your amazing selves. And we look forward to seeing you in April. Thanks. Thanks so much again. Take care and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.